Join us as we discuss current events, history, apologetics, and more. We're making education, families, and America great again. Here's Ray.
Hey, great to be with you again today, and it's 19 February 2019, and it's Ray Moore Live, and we hope to have an interesting program today. We're going to continue on with some of the same themes. If you come to visit with me on 11 a.m. to 12 a.m. on a Tuesday, you're going to find that I'm kind of often can be a Johnny One Note, covering a lot of the same territory over and over again, because it's so important that we come to terms with the fact that as conservatives and Christians, we cannot reform or fix the state-sponsored public school system. It's impossible that it can be done, and if it could be done, we shouldn't attempt it any longer, because it's failed so badly, and it's time to totally and utterly abandon that model. And I have been carrying this message or this theme to the churches and families and conservative organizations officially for 22 years. We started the Exodus Mandate Project in November of 1997. My wife and I had actually been homeschooling our children starting in 1977. And then in 1995, I wrote a little pamphlet called Let My Children Go. And it was sort of the first effort at the Exodus Mandate. And we still kind of live by that. It was a sermon. It was published in a small Christian newspaper here in Greenville, South Carolina in 1995. And then we've developed the Exodus Mandate, our many books and videos, and a national organization from that, a little sermon, a little pamphlet in 1995, and then officially launched the ministry publicly in November of 1997. So we've been at it a long time, and I have to tell you, it's been a pretty hard slog at times. In the very beginning, I've got nothing but hostility. I did have some supporters, but even my closest friends, some of them who were backing me financially, backed me because they loved me and Gail and believed in us personally, but they weren't quite sure about this agenda. They thought it was pretty quixotic and pretty impossible. It was an impossible dream. It wasn't going to happen. It was foolish to propose it, but we went ahead anyway and did it. And now, after 22 years, we're starting to get some serious traction. And there are some things developing that we'll go into today and talk about. And we hopefully it means something good for the future. Put the magazine cover up. There we go. This is the thing that we're working on right now nationally, and it's a big deal. The New American Magazine is a very excellent conservative magazine. It's not a confessionally Christian, but having said that, I don't want to be critical of them, because they are pro-Christian, pro-conservative, very strong on protecting and standing for the U.S. Constitution, which we believe is implicit Christian document if it's not explicitly so, meaning that it grew out of a Christian worldview and Christian concepts, and that's our basic governing document in the United States. And so we've been the New American Magazine supports these things, and they recently, on February 4th, and we've already had 2 programs talking about this. We're not going to concentrate on the magazine this morning. We're going to make mention of it. But on February 4th, they came out with a new issue called Rescuing Our Children. And we have a copy of it right here. And it's got 10 articles, and 5 of them are negative in the sense that they expose and talk about the terrible things that are going on in the public school system and how they're harming the children, and why we've got to get free of it, completely free. And then hopefully and thankfully, 5 of the articles are positive in the sense that they give real solutions. Alex Newman and Duke Pesta wrote 5 of the articles, and then Israel Wayne, who is one of our close allies in this ministry, wrote 2. His were on the case for Christian education, just making a general argument theologically, historically, for Christian education of some kind. And then his second article was called Benefits of Homeschooling. And then yours truly, E. Ray Moore, had an interview, which actually I crafted it myself, called Christians Getting Out. And I lay out more of a strategy or vision for how to win this battle that we're in. And so we're really excited about this. But this came out on February 4th. And we believe that over the next year, if our vast network of ministries and organizations will cooperate and get behind this and order them in bulk copies for distribution to your family, friends, your local church, your local Tea Party group, your local homeschool group, order them in boxes of 50 or 100 or even 25 if you can't afford larger amounts, and distribute them over the next year. We think that we could project 1 million copies circulating in the United States over the next year or 2. And that would be significant because this publication has the potential to change how people look at the education battle. So we ask you to help us and cooperate. Now that rolls into really what the topic is more about today. And we're going to look at a recent debate that took place at the Family Research Council in Washington, D.C. between Mary Hassan, here she is on the left, and it was a debate between her and, let me see, the other lady was also a conservative, an activist and public school parent, Meg Kilcannon. And they debated the topic and scroll down a little bit. Can't see the headline there, Jared. Go to the headline. Up. Yeah, right there. The cost of sending your kids to public school might just be their souls, by Kathy Roos. And she's a policy analyst and writer at the Family Research Council. The Family Research Council is one of our leading pro-Christian conservative public policy groups that deal largely with family and social issues in Washington, D.C. And the president of it is Tony Perkins, who's really one of our eminent conservative leaders in the nation, policy leaders. Very, very important leader, and overall does a great job. I would still not give him an A, and I'm going to get into why I won't in a few minutes, but he gets a B+. And maybe, just maybe, we're seeing a very, very important shift in the Family Research Council and how they're going to address these questions of Christian private free market education and homeschooling. I'm associated with Tony Perkins and some other organizations, and I don't want to name it, but it's a large conservative public policy organization in the nation. And he happens also to be the current president of that, but that's a temporary position. The presidency of the Family Research Council is his full-time position. And if you watch Fox News and any of the conservative media, you'll see him quite often speaking out on behalf of life as opposed to abortion, marriage, sanctity of marriage as opposed to same-sex marriage, and the rights of believers. He's a strong advocate for the First Amendment and the religious liberty for Christians and conservatives, and just does a good job But until February 11th, when this particular debate took place, there was a big gap in the approach of the Family Research Council. The Family Research Council has generally, for the last 20 years, since I have been, working my agenda, have avoided our topic almost entirely. If you saw them on anything, they were more in favor of reforming and fixing public education, which we've believed for 25 years was an impossibility. But nevertheless, like so many of our conservative friends in the political arena, and so many even our pastors and Christian friends in the evangelical world, they have been attempting the impossible for the last 25 years to fix public education. But suddenly, there's a wonderful crack in their thinking, and they have had a debate about the topic of whether we should get out of the public schools or stay in and try to fix them. And this is a wonderful thing because they wouldn't even debate us before. In other words, if you looked at what the Exodus Mandate and groups like ours were doing prior to this debate, we were invisible. Our movement didn't exist in the minds of some of these people. And I can tell you that I've tried to get a hearing with some of them for years. I tried to get on Focus on the Family with my mission to explain what we were doing and why Christians needed to leave the public school system and get completely out and start up a new private Christian school system and do homeschooling. And I couldn't even get couldn't get through the gatekeepers. I don't want to name them, but quite a few of the senior vice presidents at Focus on the Family kept me at arm's length. And I knew Dr. Dobson personally from other venues and other situations, but, his advisors advised against having me on the Focus on the Family. Very amazingly, about 2 years ago, we were at a Christian and conservative leaders conference, and he heard me speak there, and he came up to me after the conference and asked me if I would come on his radio program. And because I had failed for 10 years prior to that to get on the program, that was when he was at Focus on the Family, but now he started a new program called Family Talk. So in March of 2017, I flew out to Colorado Springs, and I was on for 2 days. Actually, he taped it, and I was there one day, but they taped 2 programs, and they played it for 2 days. And March of 2017, back-to-back programs. And if you haven't listened to that, I would ask you to go do it. It's on my webpage, exodusmandate.org, and you'll see a picture with me and Dr. Dobson. So he had me on, and perhaps 1 million people heard it. It was one of the best moments that we've had with our ministry up to that point. And just so grateful to Dr. Dobson for having us on finally. And then it went so well and was so well received that he actually played it again in December of 2017. They do take the month of December, I guess, to give the Family Talk staff a break. And they replay a dozen or so of their top programs for the year that they're in. And so we got a double dose. And they replayed our interview, and I think it was 11th and 12th of December 2017. And so we're beginning to see cracks in the wall that the conservative movement had put up against the idea of leaving and abandoning and even eventually abolishing the faulty model of state-sponsored public education. But this debate is the first thing that we've seen with the Family Research Council, and they're, of course, a big policy group right there in Washington, D.C., and so we're so excited and delighted about this debate. And I have a view that once we start debating this in the public arena, they lose. We win. The only way they can keep winning is suppress our arguments. Pretend we don't exist. Have the gatekeepers keep us out. Keep us out of the churches. Keep us out of the Christian colleges. keep us out of the conservative policy groups, because once we're starting to debate whether we should stay in the public school system or not, or we should leave, they will lose the argument because they have no arguments. And if you look at Mary Hasson, she was the one that we would favor in the debate. And I think the other lady, Meg Kilcannon, is a wonderful Christian woman and a conservative woman herself, but she's just right now a little confused. I think that's her on the right. And we see Mary Hasson on the left. Mary Hasson wrote a book entitled, I think it's been out a couple of years, and I actually heard her be interviewed on this book by Eric Metaxas on his show, and that was a big deal. I think I heard that about 6-8 months ago, and she and the co-author, a lady by the name of Farnham, were interviewed by Eric Metaxas, and he concluded at the end of their interview that he agreed with them, and it's time for Christians and conservatives to get out of these public schools now. That was pretty extraordinary, because if you know Eric Metaxas, he's probably the #1 Christian writer in the world today. He's written some wonderful books. He wrote the book on Bonhoeffer. He wrote the book on Wilberforce called Amazing Grace. I read all of these. And then recently, he's written a biography of Martin Luther. And he has this he's a best-selling author on the New York Times, and frankly, that doesn't happen to very many Christian authors. So there is a shift taking place in the conservative right, Christian right, and the evangelical world to adopt, generally speaking, the Exodus mandate model. And we've waited a long time for this, and I hope it's on the way, and we need you to help us with it. Now, let's take a look at what Mary Hasson and Meg Killiman had to say. It was an expert panel, and it was run on May 11th. Happily, the New American Magazine came out on February 11th, and the New American Magazine came out with their definitive issue on February 4th. So they got a jump on them, and we are going to steal a march, we hope, on some of these people who are lately and very belatedly and very 20 years late coming around to the right argument. But they're at least starting to make it now. Mary Hasson is a lawyer, a writer, and a scholar in Washington, D.C. with the Ethics and Public Policy Center. And her new book is entitled Get Out Now. Get Out Now. Why you should pull your child from the public school before it's too late. And here's the book, and you can order it on Amazon. Mary Rice Hasson and Teresa Farnham. Both Mary Hasson has a JD, a law degree, and Teresa Farnham has a PhD. I haven't yet read the book, but I've looked at the interview, and I'm happy and think I will be enthusiastic continue to be enthusiastic about it. She approaches it looking at the gender confusion in the public school system, and she says that's the straw that finally broke the camel's back. She asked the question, does attending a government school impact your child's faith as an adult? And she cites research that show that Catholic children who attend public school, only 5% continue to practice their faith as adults after going through public schools as children, compared to 40% who keep their faith after attending Catholic schools. Evangelical Christian children, which we are, we're not children now, but we work primarily in the evangelical Protestant community, experience a similar loss of their Christian faith. Dan Smithwick with the Nehemiah Institute has done some research on the worldview of children who attend public school, and it's just incredible, the loss of the Christian mind and the Christian worldview. So you want to more or less guarantee that your children leave the church and abandon the Christian faith and give up a Christian worldview go ahead and put them in public school. You say, well, it won't affect my children. They go to Sunday school. Yeah, they go to Sunday school. As Carl Priest, who is our West Virginia coordinator, said recently, it was really a great quote. We're going to really start using it more and more. He said, atheists don't send their children to an evangelical Christian Sunday school 1 hour a week, but evangelical Christians send their children to the atheist public schools 30 hours a week. Yes, they're more loyal and true to their faith or their atheism than we are to our Christian faith. Yeah, the pagans and the atheists and the humanists, they obey their God, but a lot of Christians don't obey their God. It's time to get real, Christian, and get your kids out of those schools. And this is what Mary Hassan is saying in this debate. And she says, not only are American public schools hostile to religious faith, they are hostile to America too. They've used Howard Zinn's book on American history for years, and 2 million copies have been circulating in the public schools. It teaches a Marxist view of American history. It's not just in the moral areas that the schools are failing. They're failing in science. They teach evolution, not creation. They teach LGBTQ. They teach Islam, and they don't teach them to read and write. But Mary Hassan says that the straw that breaks the camel's back for her, the game changer, was the fractured concept of the human person that the public schools now teach. Sexual confusion, transsexualism are now dogma. And the anti-science propaganda is producing terrible results as well. And so up to 20% of students now in public schools themselves identify as LGBTQ, she says. This is an incredible thing. Now, how can parents leave their children there? They're not responsible if they do. And so she makes a great case, but Meg Kilgannon is holding on. She's an activist and a public school parent in Fairfax County, Virginia, and she provides another perspective. She says we can't leave the schools because there's too much money on the table. And to leave that money in the schools to the liberals to use as they wish, they will ruin our nation's children, she's right about that. And while we bicker endlessly about charter schools or vouchers or whatever, the leftists happily control the spending and tax money molding our children's young minds. She's right about that. That's why we're saying get out. Get out immediately. The house is on fire. The building is burning, and if you stay there, you're going to die. We're on the Titanic. The ship has struck the iceberg. It's going down. And we're not going to debate any longer on the deck of the ship whether we're going to bail water or man the lifeboats. It's time to man the lifeboats. And so Meg somehow thinks we've got to stay in there because there's money on the table. And I think, frankly, she lost the debate, but we're glad that Family Research Council had the debate. Hassan's, and this is Kathy Ruse, R-U-S-E. She's we want to commend Kathy for arranging this and having the Family Research Council to have this debate in the first place. Remember, it's a breakthrough now. Once they focus on the Family Research Council, these Heritage Foundation, the Concerned Women for America, once these groups start waking up and having real debates and discussions on this, they will lose the argument. And we don't think with the New American Magazine coming out, they're going to be able to suppress us any longer. This is going to reach into millions of families and churches, hopefully in the next year. And there's going to be a rising tide in the culture and in the churches demanding that these conservative public policy groups get with the program and cast off the foolish idea of trying to fix public education and let's leave it behind completely. But Kathy Ruse really deserves kudos. And if you want to write the Family Research Council and as a favor to me and thank her for having this debate, I would be very grateful for you doing that. Both panelists agreed, both Mary Hasson on the left and Meg Kilcannon on the right, that there are some good teachers in the public schools still. But we've had a program on that also with Jay Jacino, while they should consider pulling out as well. Both panelists, debaters, agree that parents' first duty is to their children. So the question is, how can you best fulfill your duty? And we believe you can no longer do it by leaving your children there. Mary Hasson's final point, according to Kathy Roos, who was the one who set the debate up, stayed with me more than any other, Kathy Roos says. This is her quote. "Every education choice bears a cost," Hasson said. "The cost of private schools can be a mountain of tuition dollars. The cost of homeschooling includes time and lost income, particularly if the mother stays home and raises the children as she should and is not employed outside the home. But the cost of public education just might be your child's soul," which we concur with and we know is true. There's plenty of data on that. So this is really, really good news. And we hope that these debates continue. And we hope we might be invited at some point. We've, like I said, we've been hanging around for over 22 years making our case. And finally, we think we're breaking through. We're kind of like in the civil rights movement. And I grew up in the old South, and there were many sad things that were happening in the segregation era that we're not proud of today. But we're kind of in the lunchroom counter protest stage. You may not remember any of that, but it started where some college students, black college students, would sit in lunchroom counters and protest, and that was the beginning. So we're kind of in that stage, breaking through with the conservatives, who should have adopted this strategy 25 or 30 years ago, but they didn't. Or breaking through with the churches, where the pastors are fearful of ever dealing with it because they've got so many public school addicts in their churches. But we're starting to break through and get into the debate stage. Let's just take a quick minute and show the call to Dunkirk, because I want you to see something that we produced 10 years ago now, and it made the rounds. Call to Dunkirk. A lot of people think we just produced this the last couple of years with all the movies on Dunkirk, but actually, no, we produced it 10, 11 years ago, and now it's come back around, and it looks like it's something just came out in the last couple of years, but it really is pretty old. Let's run that. It's only 3 minutes. It's May 1940. British and Allied troops are defeated, surrounded, and about to be destroyed by the Nazi war machine on the beaches of Dunkirk. Suddenly, a miracle occurs. Thousands of pleasure yachts, fishing boats, lifeboats, merchant marine, and British naval vessels manned by ordinary citizens come to Dunkirk and rescue those soldiers in a mass exodus. Total disaster has been averted by bold leadership and ordinary citizens answering the call to Dunkirk.
The glamour and apparent power of politics attract conservatives. But the driving force behind politics is culture, and culture is shaped by how we're educated. So why should we be surprised that we're losing culturally and politically when we continue to offer up our children as living sacrifices to the Moloch of government schools? With our children under government control, the left knows that to win, all they need do is bide their time.
From kindergarten to 12th grade, children spend 14,000 seat hours in school. Whoever controls those 14,000 hours controls our children's worldview. Charles Potter, a signer of the Humanist Manifesto, said it best. What can the theistic Sunday school, meeting for an hour once a week, do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teaching?
The left knows that whoever controls the children owns the future. That's why so many 60s radicals like Bill Ayers went into education. Now they effectively control the government school system and its curriculum. But worse, we give them our children.
Listen, it's time for us to make some sacrifices. Black families often ask me, why should we leave the public schools when our forefathers fought, marched, bled, and sometimes even died so that we might have the right to attend those schools? My answer is quite simple. Our forefathers marched and bled and even died so that we would not have to accept the kind of inferior education that is currently inflicted on many minority students.
My call to Dunkirk proposal is very simple. Let all families, churches, pastors, major Christian ministries, and organizations concentrate for 1 year on extracting Christian children from the pagan, godless public schools.
A lot of effort's been wasted on school reform. Government schools are no more reformable than Soviet collective farms. The model is a mistake.
If you ask me, we need to march some more. And the first place we need to march is right out the front door of those Christ-dishonoring, academically inferior, soul-killing government indoctrination centers.
If we do not act now, I do not think history will be kind to Christian ministries and their conservative allies. History will say we played politics, lobbied unresponsive politicians, and ignored our children when we had the power and resources to save them. Rally your troops, get your vessels ready, and answer the call to Dunkirk. The future of America depends on it.
Yes, this is not recent. You may remember there was a movie in theaters about a year and a half or two ago called Dunkirk, and it basically told the story of Dunkirk. And then there was a popular movie called The Darkest Hour, which was on the role that Churchill played in rallying the British nation in the early days of World War II. And it also referred to the Dunkirk experience. I'm retired military, and I'm kind of an amateur military historian. I love these stories. And of course, a lot of our audience may not even know the story of Dunkirk. It was actually took place before the U.S. entered into World War II. And the Germans decisively defeated the British and the French forces. And in the early year, it was in 1940. Basically, Dunkirk took place in May and June of 1940. And of course, the U.S. didn't enter the war until December of 1941. And so German blitzkrieg crashed through and broke through the English and French lines, the Maginot Line, which was not a defense at all. They just went around it. And they weren't able to stop them because they didn't go through. They went around it and crashed through and trapped the British army, I think British Expeditionary Force, on the beaches of Dunkirk with some of their French allies. And there were about 70,000 English troops on a beach. And the Germans had them surrounded, and they were about to crush them and take them all prisoner. And I think if that had happened, World War II might have ended right there because they wouldn't have had any soldiers left. And a miracle took place. And over the next week, Churchill and the British people rescued about 340,000 of those troops off the beach. They left their arms behind. They had to swim out to boats. There were pleasure craft, yachts, British naval vessels, fishing vessels, all came to Dunkirk in a period of a week. It was the most amazing evacuation in perhaps world history, of military history. And they rescued the soldiers. And everybody who could engage in that helped and got the soldiers off the beach and brought them home. And Churchill said it was an evacuation, and we sure can't call it a military victory, but it was tantamount to that. It was such a significant event for their nation and for the world that it might as well have been a military victory. And the Germans hesitated. We don't quite know all the reasons why. I think the Wehrmacht, which the German Air Force thought they could finish them off, and they wouldn't need to use the infantry and the tankers to do it, and they failed, and they let them escape. And escape they did. And so I study these. I like to make analogies. If you watch me long, you'll see me make these, tell stories and try to compare them to spiritual events. I say we need a Dunkirk moment in the churches. And we need everybody, every church and every family and every conservative organization to come to Dunkirk and help us get our children off those beaches, get them off of those pagan beaches where they're being destroyed by the pagan humanist leftist enemy and rescue the children. And I did this 10 years ago, but it came back around the last couple of years and it's been very popular. And if you don't have one, we have them on a DVD in the office. We can send it to you. It's only 3 minutes and it works very well for a small group, a Bible study, a church group, and show it. It says everything we want to say in the Exodus Mandate in 3 minutes. We got it down. We got our message down to 3 minutes. That's pretty hard to do, but we have. So please ask us for that if you don't have it, and we'll send it to you. Or you can go on YouTube and click on it there, Call to Dunkirk, and you can extract it and use it and send it out to your friends. Now, there is a 5-minute version on YouTube and a 3-minute version, but we tend to use the 3-minute version. The 5-minute version just has a little more information in it. Now, this past weekend, I can't name the group, but I was at a very important Christian and conservative leaders conference. I'm a member of a group, and we had Alex Newman was there, who's the principal author of the articles in the New American. I was there. There were about 350 major national conservative and Christian leaders in attendance. And we were able to distribute over 150 copies of this magazine to these leaders. Now, we were actually able to engage probably half of the 150 in personal conversations, hand it to them, and they were very, very glad to get it. And if I name some of them, you would know their names. And so it was a very exciting moment. And to have this magazine called Rescuing Our Children ready to give out at that meeting was a very, very important moment for the magazine, for the New American, and also for the Exodus Mandate, because we were involved in crafting the articles. I was a consultant to Alex Newman, who again is the principal writer. And then they interviewed me and asked me to do one of the articles. And I'm happy to report that we get named in this issue 3 times. And several times they call and make note of the call to Dunkirk. So they noted it in the magazine, and I noted it in my interview as well. So please get the call to Dunkirk if you don't have it, and if you want to order it from the office, we'll make it available. You can write us at Exodus Mandate @gmail.com, or you can call the office at area code 803-714-1744. That's 803-714-1744. Of course, we have quite a lot of other materials as well. We would like to ask you to order the new magazine, New American Magazine, February 4th issue, and the title is Rescuing Our Children. And if you need a phone number, if you could go to jbs.org, or you could call 800-342-6491 and make an order there. We'd ask you to order a minimal number of 25, and if you can handle 50 or 100, that would be even better. And of course, if you get them in bulk in large numbers, the price really goes down. I have a coordinator in East Tennessee who's been working with me for years, and he ordered 1,000 copies, or is planning to order 1,000 copies of the magazine. Now, he's going to cover 4 or 5 counties in East Tennessee. And then it was reported to me a day before yesterday that someone else, and I don't know where this person lives, has also ordered 1,000 copies for a distribution in a wide area. But typically we're finding that people are ordering 50 or 100 just routinely and giving them out. All right, so that's kind of it. And we still have 15 minutes. And I want to talk a little bit about the things that we brought up today. The point we're making today is it's time for the conservative and Christian leadership to give up the foolishness of public school reform. Scripturally speaking, they shouldn't be reformed because God did not ordain state-sponsored public education. It was assigned by Scripture and sound theology to the church, to the family with assistance from the church. The church and the family has the jurisdiction, biblically speaking, for education, not government. And anytime the government gets into a jurisdictional area that it doesn't belong to them, they always foul it up. They just inevitably will foul it up. And we've talked in this program many times that we didn't have state-sponsored public education in the United States for the first 220 years of American history. And this magazine also brings out that bad history. It was actually a good history for many, many years until Horace Mann and John Dewey came along. Horace Mann in the 1840s, and then John Dewey around the turn of the 20th century. And Horace Mann is considered the father of public education. He was a Unitarian, did not believe in the Trinity, and he was a socialist. And then, of course, John Dewey came along around the turn of the 20th century, and he's considered the father of progressive education. Don't want to get off on that this morning, but we want to go back to the original American model, which was free market, private, community, and Christian schools, and that also corresponds to the biblical model. We don't want to fix these schools any longer. The longer we attempt it, the worse it gets. They can't be fixed. And I think Mary Hassan won the debate. At least I feel she did. And we're thankful to Meg Kilgannon for being willing to debate. And we think it's in the debate format that we can make our case. And so if you can get into a situation where you can get a debate going, sometimes they don't want to give us just a full reign. They're willing to allow a debate, and we need to let that happen. So we want to debate the pros and cons of Christian private education and debate the idea of public school reform. And we think when that format takes place, we can win because the arguments are so clear on our side. Okay, I see we've got a couple of people on today. Maybe we can get some questions or some comments.
Yeah, Ray, I had a question about have you ever heard of what is your stand? You know, in the old school where you would teach your child a trade, so apprenticeship model of education. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of anybody doing that modern, like a successful?
Oh, yes.
So like a real apprenticeship?
We have a member of our new Christian Education Initiative, and I'm the chairman of that. We haven't gone public with it yet. We hope to announce it and put out a news release within the next 2 to 3 weeks. But we have about 20 members, and one of our members is Brian Schonzenbach, and he concentrates on this particular area. He's a worldview specialist. He's written some wonderful books on Christian worldview, but he's also writing some books and syllabus really right now on the apprenticeship model. And I guess I don't have his information on the tip of my tongue, but we could put you in touch with him. He's actually written seven books. We've got some really amazing people in our new association called the Christian Education Initiative. We haven't gone public with it yet. That's something we're going to be doing, I hope, in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But that's a good question. So yes, that is one of the models.
So and what was his name again?
Schonzenbach. I'll have to. You asked the question, I wasn't prepared for the answer. So we have the information, and we can put you in touch with him. He lives in Southwest Virginia, near the Tennessee border, the Tri-Cities area. That's Kingsport, Bristol, Johnson City. He lives in just a few miles across the Virginia border in Southwest Virginia, right near the Tri-Cities. That's what they call the Tri-Cities. And we have he's a member of a Westminster Presbyterian Church in Kingsport, and we have a lot of supporters in that particular congregation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the reason I ask is, with my business, the way it works, website design and stuff like that, I mean, apprenticeship with homeschoolers is something I would love to do, is teach kids how to use computers.
We can probably have a program on this at some time in the future. I've got so much material that I could address. and we know him, and he's part of our coalition. He's a real scholar. He's written books on worldview as well. Okay, that's a good question. So yes, apprenticeship is one way to go, and that was very common in the earlier century. Sometimes children didn't go to formal education very far. If you look at the founders, some of them were homeschooled and they learned to farm or they learned trades, but yet they were all highly educated. I mean, some people didn't go to university. It was rare. A lot of people don't know they didn't even have law schools until, I don't know, around the turn of the 20th century. People would read for the bar. The way they learned to be lawyers, they would go apprentice. They would work with a lawyer and study, and they would take them through academic paces. They had to read Blackstone's commentaries. They had to read all these books, and they couldn't become lawyers until they passed the bar exam, but they got an education through an apprenticeship. They didn't go to school for it. And they had to study the Constitution, and they had to study Blackstone. Today, when you go to law school, they don't study the Constitution. They study case law, and they study court cases. So even the law schools are not doing what they should. They should be made to study the Constitution as an originalist matter. Judge Scalia, who passed away a few years ago, was an originalist. He said it's important to know what the Constitution really says and study it and look at it through the eyes and the lens of the founders. They don't do that today. They look at what's the most recent case, and they say, well, we can't repeal Roe v. Wade because we can't undo abortion because Roe v. Wade has precedent. It's a recent case, and it says abortion is legal. Well, you can go back through the history of jurisprudence in the Constitution, and there was Plessy versus Ferguson in forget what year it was, and they said segregation was good and right and legal. Well, it isn't today. And Dred Scott case, Lincoln just ignored that case, defining a black man as not being a citizen. They just ignored it. Nobody respects Dred Scott today. It's a antiquated decision, but it was a Supreme Court decision. So there's a lot of things they've done in the court, in court orders and jurisprudence that are not constitutional. And so we need to study the Constitution. You got me off on that one, Jared, because yes, apprenticeship was a good thing, and it was how many things were done, before the turn of the 20th century. Most people don't know that about law. Law schools are new.
I've got a follow-up question for parents. How would you approach? I had a conversation with a gentleman the other day, and he said to me, he said, probably 85% of kids who go to college should not go to college because they're not the type of person that needs higher education. They're more of a blue collar, a worker. Go be a carpenter. Go apprentice somewhere. As a parent, if you're homeschooling, is college the end state goal always? And then how do you? What do you think? What would be your answer?
That's a good question. There's a kind of a joke going around today. Send your children to college to get a degree in arts or some psychology. What do you do with psychology? And go to college and get a degree, get a BA degree, and come out with $250,000 in debt and no job. You can't get a job. You have to move back in with your parents because you can't get a job. Or go to a trade school or a technical school, learn a trade or a skill, have no debt, graduate with no debt, and get a job making $70,000, $80,000 a year. Yeah, that is really happening, and some people are doing it. We know a lot of Christian kids that are homeschooled up through high school even, and then they go to a local technical college, and many of these technical colleges are academically as strong as a university. Here in South Carolina, the technical colleges have a superior nursing program than the universities do. You can go there and learn car mechanics, ITT, architecture, drafting. You can get some kind of semi-engineering degrees, and we know a lot of children that go to these technical colleges for 2 years and stay home. They don't have to go live in the dormitories where there's all kinds of promiscuity and drugs and things going on. It used to be when I went to college, you wouldn't put men and women in the same dormitory. Today, they're in the same dormitory, in the same hall. They share bathrooms, and they cohabitate. I mean, the insanity that's gripped higher education is just enormous today. And so we could go back to that model. And a lot of homeschool kids, we have several in our church that stay home and go to technical college. And then when they get to their junior or senior year, they go to the university so they can get their Bachelor of Science degree. But they generally avoid it as long as they can. Sometimes people do need the Bachelor of Science for some sort of a certification, authentication. And I don't want to say that you need it or not need it, but some people choose that route. But we know kids that get ITT and get out and get really good jobs. They don't have any debt. Good questions. Somebody else. We still have 5 minutes. Anybody a question about school reform and I'd like you to please go and read the article by Kathy Ruth, which was posted up early. The cost of sending your kids to public school just might be their souls. And if you want to, you could even order the book by Mary Hasson. I think she's Catholic, so she's not going to have a strictly evangelical point of view, but she will be making a strong moral case. And we think the moral case needs to be made most of all. And she's saying it's not moral to put your children in these schools that are teaching sexual confusion. But at least listen to the debate. And if you can, and contact Kathy Ruth, that's R-U-S-E, and commend her and thank her for having this debate. And you might tell her to invite yours truly, E. Ray Moore, to come speak. Because I do speak at forums like that. All right, we still have 5 minutes. I see a lot of guests on today. I see some new names too. If you can go to the upper right corner and hit the donor button. We do have costs to run these programs, and my staff complains from time to time that I don't make enough of an announcement that we need donations. See the donation button there in the upper right. And of course, the programs are archived. So if you can't make one, and you can always hit the archive button in the upper right and go look at past programs. And we've been doing this 9 months now, and we've got a body of work. And see the one by Jay Jacino on January 8th. That was a very valuable one because we talk about the teachers also needing to leave the public school system. Every now and then I do a lighthearted one. I did one about Clemson football, but it was Christian oriented. We had some Christmas programs about our family. My personal favorite, since I've been doing this, was on October 2, entitled J. Gresham Machen. And if you want to do me a personal favor, go look at that one. That's my personal favorite. And then my next personal favorite was on 8/21, and that's my wife and I. Scroll down to that one. It's called Awakenings with Gail Moore. And I interviewed my wife about her studies on revivals and awakenings. And she's wonderful, and I wish she could be on with me more. She's been on me 4 or 5 times. But this was a very good program, and she's quite brilliant and able herself, a good scholar, and she studied awakenings and the great revivals in history in even modern times. And frankly, my friends, we've got to have one today. We're not going to get out of this awful, terrible tailspin we're in, where our culture is going to crash and burn unless God were to intervene. So if you want to learn about revival and how God might do that in our day, go look at that one on 8/21, Awakenings with Gail Moore. Okay,
well, Ray,
yeah.
Do you see that happening now? I mean, it seems that there's a lot of the abortion front it's getting worse on the one side, But on the other side, it's getting better. There's states who are introducing heartbeat bills, and and then with education, we've got the New American Magazine, and we've got Family Research Council coming forward now. These big names, these big people saying, "Hey, let's, there's a problem here." Do you see that revival happening, or what do you?
I wish I could say absolutely certainly. I knew that God is going to work and preserve a remnant. A remnant is where God preserves a godly group of people who are obedient and follow Him. But I honestly think it could be happening. And what would it look like if there was a revival starting to unfold? Well, it would look just like the Exodus mandate and what we're doing. Because when there's a revival and renewal in a culture, we go back to the old ways. We reestablish and strengthen the things that were given. And so there would be a strengthening in the family. We would see a return to Christian schooling and homeschooling. We'd see restoration of broken marriages. And that's what this movement is all about. So yes, I think it could be happening, and hopefully we are part of it if indeed it is happening. Good question. We got 1 minute left. Okay. Thank you for being with us today, and please try to follow up on some of these things, and ask your friends to go look at Ray Moore Live and hit some of the past programs as well. Let's close in prayer. Father God, we thank you for some of these Christian and conservative public policy groups that are now awakening themselves and coming out of the slumber of school reform. We thank you for the debate that was held recently at the Family Research Council. We pray you would cause them to turn even more toward getting the kids out into Christian and homeschooling. Bless us in our effort in that arena as well. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. This is my story, and I'm sticking with it.